Welcome to The Explainer. I want you to imagine stepping right into the bomb-shattered, rubble-strewn streets of Nuremberg, Germany. It's the fall of 1945. World War II is finally over, and the whole world is demanding justice. But listen, this isn't just another story about a military tribunal. No, this is a psychological true crime thriller. We're going to look at a literal attempt to profile the ultimate evil and follow the exact man who is tasked with looking deep inside the minds of the architects of the Holocaust.
Which brings us to a really chilling question. Is there a genetic blueprint for pure evil? A literal Nazi germ? Well, this was the exact question handed to a brilliant 33-year-old U.S. Army psychiatrist named Dr. Douglas Kelley. You see, his mission wasn't just to keep the prisoners sane for trial. He desperately wanted to discover some biological or psychological anomaly, some distinct criminal trait that could explain how human beings were capable of such unprecedented atrocities. He literally wanted to find the cure.
Okay, let's dive into this. 22, that is the number of the most notorious surviving architects of Nazi terror locked inside a prison right next to the Palace of Justice. Men who had literally shattered the globe were now completely stripped of their power, just sitting in these austere cells awaiting judgment. And the scale of this assignment? Staggering. Kelley essentially had a front row seat, a totally exclusive laboratory to study the absolute darkest corners of human nature.
So how exactly do you profile a monster? Well, Kelley took this incredibly methodical, highly scientific approach. He didn't just casually chat with them. He administered comprehensive Rorschach inkblot tests to really probe their subconscious. He used thematic apperception tests, ran extensive IQ assessments, and spent hours and hours conducting direct behavioral observation. He was actively searching for a shared psychosis, a definitive marker of madness that would safely separate these men from the rest of humanity.
But what happens when the doctor looks into the abyss and the abyss looks back? We get this fatal meeting of minds. On one side, you've got Dr. Douglas Kelley, a former child prodigy from the Terman experiments, a brilliant psychiatrist with 135 IQ and deeply ambitious. And on the other, Hermann Göring, Hitler's second-in-command, highly intelligent, fiercely manipulative, and honestly, equally ambitious. These eerie similarities between the two men really set the stage for an intense, high-stakes psychological cat-and-mouse game inside that prison. Now, when Göring first arrived, he was completely a shadow of his former self. He was addicted to 100 paracodeine pills a day and severely overweight. Kelley, acting as his doctor, methodically treated this addiction and oversaw a dramatic 60-pound weight loss. But here's the crazy part. In rebuilding the enemy's physical health, Kelley inadvertently restored Göring's formidable manipulative charisma. Because of this, Göring totally reclaimed his dominance among the other prisoners, basically treating the upcoming trial not as a judgment, but as his final, grand performance.
And this brilliantly illustrates the terrifying duality Kelley discovered. It's all about the masks of public figures. On one side, you have the human, a devoted husband, a doting father, who literally ordered 500 planes to fly over Berlin when his daughter was born. A passionate animal rights advocate who actually helped a Jewish nurse escape. But on the other side, the monster. The ruthless opportunist who orchestrated the bombing of civilians and architected mass murder. How do these two extremes exist in just one mind?
Well, the answer was a chilling lack of empathy. When Kelley asked Göring about ordering the execution of his own close friend, Ernst Röhm, during the Night of the Long Knives, Göring casually replied, "He was in my way." Just like that. It was a moment that proved to Kelley that the Nazi leader completely lacked a moral compass. Göring wasn't driven by some insane, uncontrollable frenzy. He was driven by cold, calculated, and terrifying self-interest.
And this led to a truly horrifying realization for Kelley. The Nazi regime wasn't a cult of insane madmen at all. It functioned exactly like a ruthless, opportunistic corporation. Think of it as Third Reich Inc. You had Hitler as the visionary CEO, Göring on the board of directors managing high-level execution, propagandists like Goebbels handling marketing and sales, and mid-level Nazis acting as unquestioning executive employees. They adopted hateful ideologies, not as deep philosophical truths, but basically as strategic marketing to mobilize the masses.
So, the crucial point is one that philosopher Hannah Arendt would famously coin years later, the banality of evil. It's the philosophical concept that great atrocities aren't necessarily committed by sociopaths or monsters. Instead, they're committed by ordinary people motivated by ambition, thoughtlessness, and mindless conformity.
Kelley actually arrived at this exact same terrifying conclusion during his time in those cells. He realized the architects of the Holocaust weren't biologically different from anyone else.
In fact, Kelley arrived at this soul-crushing conclusion. He stated, "Without Hitler, these people are not abnormal. They are like any aggressive, smart, ambitious, ruthless businessman." He realized there was no Nazi germ. These men were perfectly sane. They were legally and morally fit to stand trial. But for Kelley, and honestly for the rest of the world, this completely erased the comforting boundary between us and them. It meant that under the right circumstances, ordinary, ambitious people are absolutely capable of extraordinary evil. The trial eventually climaxed in a dramatic battle of wills. The Nuremberg trials officially began in November 1945, and after months of grueling testimony and graphic evidence, on October 1, 1946, Göring was found guilty and sentenced to hang. But, true to form, Göring refused to let his captors have the final say. On October 15th, literally the night before his execution, he committed suicide in his cell using a smuggled potassium cyanide capsule. It was his final defiant escape.
Now, how do you think Dr. Kelley reacted to this? He wrote, "His suicide was a skillful, even brilliant finishing touch." That is a shocking reaction from a U.S. Army psychiatrist. It really shows how Kelley's professional objectivity had blurred into this dark, unsettling admiration for his subject's final move. Göring had cheated the hangman, and Kelley just couldn't help but respect the dark cunning of it.
Section 14. The Doctor's Tragic Echo. The Cost of Coming Too Close to Evil.
Now, what's really interesting about his post-war decline is tracking what happened after the trials. Dr. Kelley returned home to America, but listen, you don't spend months probing the minds of history's greatest monsters without it taking a massive toll. Kelley really struggled to escape the darkness he had uncovered. He desperately warned America of incipient fascism and how easily populist manipulation could take root anywhere. But the public, they didn't want to hear that Nazis were normal. They wanted to believe they were monsters. Feeling professionally underappreciated and dismissed, his personal life just began to unravel. He developed a dark obsession with criminology and poisons, and suffered from escalating aggression and severe alcoholism. Tragically, his life was beginning to mirror his darkest patient.
Let's move to and see how this builds to a truly terrifying conclusion. Look at these fatal parallels. In August 1945, Dr. Kelley and Hermann Göring meet in detention. In October 1946, Göring swallows a potassium cyanide capsule to escape justice. Then, on January 1, 1958, after a loud domestic dispute, Dr. Douglas Kelley swallows a potassium cyanide capsule right in front of his family. He took his own life in the exact same manner as the Nazi leader he had studied so intensely.
It's a haunting parallel, and it leaves us with a critical question. If the architects of history's greatest atrocities were terrifyingly normal, what actually protects our society from repeating history? There is no biological vaccine against evil. It's a fragile boundary, maintained only by our collective societal responsibility and our willingness to look inward at the banality of evil. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll leave you to think on that.